artifact porn. Kim Kardashian's 2018 Met Gala photo, taken in front of the gilded coffin of Nedja Monk, caught the attention of the Manhattan DA's Antiquities Trafficking Unit. When investigators looked into the artifact's paperwork, they discovered the export documents were forged and the coffin had actually been looted from Egypt in 2011. The viral photo helped trigger the investigation that ultimately exposed the trafficking network and led to the coffin being returned to Egypt in 2019. When Yoshitaro Shibasaki and his team scaled Mount Tsurugi in 1907, believed at the time to be Japan's final unclimbed peak, they were stunned to find ancient relics already waiting at the summit. A decorative metal staff fitting and a sword were discovered near the top, and later analysis revealed they'd been placed there over 1,000 years earlier. This 250-year-old mechanical swan still glides and bends its neck as if it were still alive. Built in 1773 by master showman James Cox and ingenious inventor John Joseph Merlin, the automaton uses hundreds of hidden clockwork components to make the bird preen, ripple the water below it, and even snatch a silver fish from the stream. In 1835, a man digging a duck pond in Margate, England, accidentally discovered the Shell Grotto, an underground chalk passage decorated with about 4.6 million seashells arranged across 2,000 square feet of mosaic. Most of the shells, mussels, oysters, scallops, etc., appear to have been collected from nearby Kent beaches, though some are foreign species. Its age, purpose, and creators remain completely unknown. Morbid facts. 2005, Thomas Montgomery, a 46-year-old married man from New York, created an online persona named Tommy, presenting himself as an 18-year-old Marine. Using this catfish, he began an online relationship with a 17-year-old girl from West Virginia named Jessie. But Montgomery's coworker, 22-year-old Brian Barrett, also became involved with Jessie online. When Jessie started shifting her attention to Barrett without him having to catfish her, Montgomery became consumed with jealousy. Eventually, Montgomery ambushed Barrett in their workplace parking lot and shot him 3 times with a military-style rifle, with one bullet piercing his neck as he sat in his car. Tommy was later arrested and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, receiving 20 years in prison. But the story didn't stop there. In a final shocking twist, it was revealed that the teen girl they'd both been obsessed with was actually a 45-year-old housewife who was using her daughter's photos to catfish men online. Morbid facts. In 2015, Selena Gomez was diagnosed with lupus, an autoimmune disease that began attacking her kidneys and led to life-threatening complications. By 2017, her condition had worsened to the point where she required a kidney transplant to survive. Her close friend Francia Raisa volunteered to donate one without Selena even asking, and while the transplant initially appeared to be successful, Gomez suffered a serious complication when the new kidney twisted inside her body, cutting off blood flow. Doctors had to perform emergency surgery, using a vein from her leg to construct a new artery to save the organ. The experience left her with lasting physical and emotional scars, and although it deepened her bond with Raisa at the time, their relationship later became strained, reportedly because of Selena's drinking habits following the surgery, which Raisa felt was disrespectful to her and even dangerous, considering the seriousness of the surgery and the need to protect the donated organ. Morbid facts. Despite having no prior acting experience, 12-year-old Kevin Clark was cast as drummer Freddie Jones in the cult classic School of Rock. Sadly, he died in 2021 at the age of 32 after being fatally struck by a car while riding his bike in Chicago. In 1978, 134 Chinese sailors were killed because a Navy lieutenant broke up with his girlfriend. After being dumped, she took her own life, leading to the man being discharged from duty pending the investigation. So while raging on his last voyage home, he decided to detonate the charges on the ship, causing it to sink while killing 134 sailors on board. Scientists have conducted studies where they transferred gut bacteria from schizophrenic humans to mice, resulting in the mice exhibiting schizophrenic behaviors. This suggests a potential link between gut health and the development of mental disorders. In 1997, 50-year-old Massachusetts woman Judy Smith was in Philadelphia with her husband when she told him she was going out sightseeing in the city, but she never returned. Months later, her body was found in a forest 600 miles away in North Carolina, wearing different clothes and a new backpack. She had been mysteriously stabbed to death, and her killer remains unidentified to this day. In case you need a few reasons to feel thankful for your mom, these are some of the worst mothers of all time. Suffering from severe postpartum psychosis in 2001, Andrea Yates methodically drowned her 5 children one by one in the family bathtub. She believed she was saving them from eternal damnation and was committed to a mental asylum for the rest of her life. Over a 14-year span, Mary Beth Tinning's children kept dying mysteriously, 9 of them in total. The cause of death for the first few was thought to be genetic, but it was later revealed she had smothered most of them to gain sympathy and attention. In 1983, Diane Downs shot her 3 children in cold blood, killing one and paralyzing another, simply because the man she was dating didn't like kids. She then drove them to the hospital slowly while her children were screaming in agony beside her. Blanche Monier's mother imprisoned her in a windowless room for 25 years, simply because she fell in love with a man her family deemed unsuitable. Under her mother's control, Blanche was kept in darkness, starved, and left to rot in her own filth, until authorities discovered her in 1901 weighing just 55 pounds and barely clinging on to life. Between 1996 and 2006, Megan Huntsman secretly gave birth to 7 infants and killed each one immediately after birth, hiding the tiny bodies in cardboard boxes in her garage. Her family discovered them years later, and she was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Spanish woman Aurora Rodriguez conceived her daughter Hildegard as an experiment to create the perfect human. Hildegard became a prodigy, reading at age 2, speaking 4 languages by 8, and entering law school by the age of 13. But when she eventually sought independence as an adult, Aurora declared the experiment a failure and shot her daughter in her sleep. She later said the sculptor, after discovering the most minimal imperfection in his work, destroys it. She spent most of her 26-year sentence in a mental asylum. Morbid facts. A French woman was scammed out of 830,000 euros after falling for an elaborate scheme involving an AI-generated version of Brad Pitt. It began in 2023 when someone posing as Pitt's mother contacted her online, followed by Brad himself claiming he was battling kidney cancer and desperately needed financial help or else he was gonna die. He sent AI-generated hospital photos showing himself bruised and hooked up to machines. Over time, the woman was manipulated into believing they were in a secret relationship, one he swore had to be kept quiet because of restrictive Hollywood contracts. She even believed they were engaged and that he planned to move to France to marry her. She wired him thousands for fake medical bills and customs fees for luxury gifts that he sent her but never arrived. After her husband divorced her over the delusion, she sent the scammers 775,000 euros she received from the settlement. Despite repeated warnings, she insisted it was true love until she eventually realized she had thrown her entire life away for a fake person. Morbid facts. Ted Cassidy, best known for playing Lurch in the original Addams Family, was 6 feet 9 inches tall. He died from a botched surgery to remove a tumor from his heart, which resulted from the condition of acromegaly that caused his iconic voice, facial structure, and towering height. After leasing the World Trade Center just weeks before 9/11, Larry Silverstein filed an insurance claim arguing that the attacks on the Twin Towers constituted 2 separate terrorist events, entitling him to double the $3.5 billion per occurrence payout. The case went to court, where the court agreed with Silverstein for 9 of the 20 insurance companies, forcing them to pay double. In total, Silverstein received around $4.55 billion for the collapse of the World Trade Center. In 1991, 5 young boys vanished while searching for salamander eggs on a mountain in South Korea, earning them the nickname the Frog Boys. Despite a massive nationwide search, their remains weren't discovered until 2002, just a few miles from where they disappeared. Initially ruled as deaths by exposure, an autopsy revealed that 4 boys had suffered blunt force trauma to the head and 1 had a gunshot wound. Even more unsettling, their clothes were found tied together with bullets wrapped in them. The site was suspiciously close to a military training zone, but police refused to investigate any military involvement. No one has been held accountable to this day. This clip from a 1995 talk show would later become key evidence in a murder case.
Let's have John come out here and see who has the crush on him. Here's John. Did you think Donna had the crush on you?
Did I? No, we're good friends.
Well, guess what? It's Scott that has the crush on you.
You lied to me.
1995, 32-year-old Scott Amador appeared on The Jenny Jones Show to reveal a secret crush on his longtime friend Jonathan Schmitz. Before the taping, producers had reportedly told Schmitz that a woman had a crush on him, not that the admirer would actually be his male friend. When the truth was revealed on stage, Schmitz appeared to take the surprise in stride and even laughed it off in front of the studio audience. But after the episode was recorded, he apparently became deeply embarrassed by the public revelation. Just 3 days later in Michigan, Schmitz bought a shotgun, drove to Amador's home and shot him twice in the chest, killing him instantly. He then called 911 and confessed to the shooting. Schmitz was later convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison, eventually being released on parole in 2017. The killing, which became known as the Jenny Jones murder, sparked a nationwide debate about the ethics of 1990s ambush-style talk shows and the use of the so-called gay panic defense in court. Most morbid facts. Adult star Emily Willis was left permanently disabled after a medical crisis at a rehab facility treating her for ketamine addiction. She reportedly suffered a heart attack and wasn't hospitalized in time, leading to 40 minutes of CPR, severe oxygen loss, and irreversible brain damage. After 2 months in a vegetative state, she now suffers from locked-in syndrome, a condition where the patient is conscious but can't move any muscles except the eyes. These photos from 1999 show Columbine student Dustin Gordon after being told the shooters were his good friends Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. Dustin was reportedly a very nice kid and couldn't fathom his friends killing 12 innocent students. In 2004, Gail Laverne Grimes died in the hospital after surgeons spent 6 exhausting hours trying to separate her skin from a couch. The 500-pound woman had been sitting on her living room sofa for 6 years to the point where her skin had completely fused to the fabric. Rescue workers had to transport Gail in her couch using a trailer, and she ended up dying while still attached to it. This 15th century Italian painting is the earliest known depiction of the guinea worm, a parasite that enters through dirty water and grows into a 3-foot-long worm that painfully erupts from the skin. Splashing water on the wound eases the burning but triggers the worm to release more larvae, only repeating the cycle. In 1986, there were over 3.5 million cases, but the numbers have dropped off significantly ever since. In 2010, a Russian man died after being voluntarily buried alive by his friends. He was simply trying to overcome his irrational fear of dying when the ground suddenly caved in and crushed him. Grape had become such a big problem across Africa that a South African doctor invented Grape-X in 2005. It's a device with sharp teeth that gets inserted into a woman's private area. Any man who attempts to grape her will impale himself on the teeth and must go to a hospital to have the device removed. According to historians, we would have a lot more ancient Egyptian mummies intact today if so many of them weren't eaten during the Victorian era. People used to believe that the ground-up corpses of ancient Egyptians could cure different ailments. There's a room in the basement of Oregon State Hospital known today as the Room of Forgotten Souls. In 2004, hundreds of copper cans were discovered holding the remains of 3,600 mental patients who were cremated on site since 1917. Liam Ashley was a 17-year-old boy from New Zealand who had criminal charges pressed against him by his parents for using their car without their permission. His parents denied bail so that he would be sent to prison and hopefully learn his lesson. While being transported in a prison van, Liam was attacked by a dangerous criminal and killed. Morbid facts. While filming Jackass No. 2, Johnny Knoxville attempted a motocross backflip that went horribly wrong when the bike crashed down handlebars first directly onto his crotch. Knoxville was immediately rushed to the hospital, where doctors discovered the trauma had torn his urethra and partially detached it from his bladder. For the next 3 years, he had to perform painful self-catheterization twice daily to keep the torn tissue from sealing shut. He later described the sensation of pushing a tube through the raw, unhealed tissue as like jamming a knife into an open wound every single day. The risk of infection was constant, and any mistake could have led to permanent urinary dysfunction or worse. In 1912, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar vanished from his family's tent during a camping trip in Louisiana, sparking a frantic 8-month search. He was eventually found in Mississippi with another family who insisted that he was actually their son, Bruce Anderson. But sadly, the Andersons didn't have the money to fight this in court, so they lost custody of the child. The Dunbars took the boy home and raised him as their son Bobby Dunbar for the remainder of his life. Decades later, in 2004, DNA testing confirmed that the boy they took from the Andersons was not Bobby Dunbar, as the real Bobby Dunbar's fate remains unknown to this day. Morbid facts. Ana Barraza, known as the Little Old Lady Killer, was a Mexican professional wrestler who murdered at least 16 elderly women in Mexico City between 1998 and 2006. She posed as a social worker to gain access to her victims' homes, then strangled them, often with cords or her bare hands, and stole their belongings. Her strength and wrestling background, performing under the name the Lady of Silence, made her attacks especially brutal. Panic gripped the city as authorities struggled to solve the case until she was finally caught fleeing a murder scene. Peraza later confessed a deep resentment toward her abusive mother and was sentenced to 759 years in prison. Vlad the Impaler earned his name through the methodical terror he inflicted on his enemies. When the mighty Ottoman Empire invaded his territory in 1462, they were met with a nightmarish sight. A forest of 20,000 impaled corpses mounted on tall wooden stakes and left to rot beneath the scorching summer sun. The victims, captured soldiers, peasants, and anyone who defied Vlad, including children, were arranged with chilling precision, their decomposing bodies spreading a stench of death for miles. Upon seeing this grotesque display, Sultan Mehmed II was so disturbed that he ordered his army of 100,000 men to retreat. Insane lawsuits. In 2009, a Canadian woman named Karen Sala sued Keanu Reeves for $150,000 a month in child support and $3 million in spousal support, claiming he had fathered her 4 adult children. She alleged that Reeves had used hypnosis and even shapeshifting to disguise himself as her ex-husband before impregnating her. Reeves denied ever meeting her, and a DNA test confirmed he was not the father. Despite Sala's bizarre claims that the DNA test was tampered with, the judge dismissed the case as baseless and a waste of court resources. Reeves later referred to the ordeal as horrible. Ana Ayala famously sued Wendy's after claiming she found a human finger in her bowl of chili. But investigators soon discovered she planted it herself. It was a severed finger she received from a friend who had lost it in a workplace accident. She was later sentenced to 9 years in prison for attempted grand theft. In the 90s, a student named John Leonard tried to claim a Harrier jet that Pepsi jokingly offered in a commercial for 7 million Pepsi points. He legally submitted enough money to buy the points, but Pepsi refused. Leonard sued, but the court ruled that the ad was clearly a joke and dismissed the case, saying no reasonable person would think a military jet was a real offer. Morbid facts. In 2006, Ray Rivera vanished after receiving a sudden phone call and rushing out of his Baltimore home. Over a week later, his body was found in a locked conference room at the Belvedere Hotel, having somehow crashed through the roof from above. The hole he fell through was bizarrely placed, far too distant from any ledge to be reached by a typical jump, leading some to believe he may have been thrown off the roof or pushed from a higher level of the building. Even stranger, a cryptic note filled with movie references and secret society names was discovered taped behind his computer. The Eerie case still remains officially unsolved. Just recently, paranormal investigator Dan Rivera was found dead in his hotel room while on the Devils on the Run tour in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Best known for touring with the infamous Annabelle doll from The Conjuring, the 54-year-old had spent years investigating haunted locations and was a prominent figure in the New England Society for Psychic Research. His sudden death with no signs of foul play has fueled eerie speculation, given his close proximity to one of the world's most notorious possessed objects. As of now, the cause of death remains unknown, as Rivera's mysterious end has only deepened the legend surrounding Annabelle. Morbid facts. Pop icon Claude Francois, often hailed as the French Elvis, met a gruesome end in 1978 when he tried to fix a flickering light bulb while standing in a bathtub filled with water. The 39-year-old received a severe electric shock that immediately fried his internal organs and stopped his heart. A family preparing to bury a loved one was shocked to find that one of the burial plots they had purchased was already occupied. Despite extensive efforts, no one could determine who the mystery individual was or how they ended up buried there. Rather than exhume the remains, the family decided to let the unknown person rest in peace, marking the grave with a headstone that simply read "Random Person." In the 1960s, the CIA was looking for creative ways to spy on the Russians without being noticed. That's when they came up with the genius idea to use a cat to record Russian conversations. A veterinary surgeon implanted a microphone in the cat's ear and a radio transmitter at the base of its skull. The plan was for the cat to be released near a Soviet embassy and innocuously record any dialogue amongst the men. But after 5 years of research and $20 million in funding, the cat was struck and killed by a taxicab almost immediately. Morbid facts. Chandler from Mr. Beast videos suffers from a genetic eye condition called a chromatopsia that only allows him to see the world in shades of white, black, and gray. It's a rare form of color blindness where all 3 cone types are completely absent from the eye, resulting in the inability to perceive any colors whatsoever. Scottish guitarist Les Harvey, known for performing with multiple rock bands throughout the 60s and 70s, narrowly escaped death in a fatal car crash in 1965, only to be fatally electrocuted on stage in 1972 after touching an ungrounded microphone. This gravestone is shared by twin sisters Emily and Minnie Dodsworth. Emily lived for just 2 days while Minnie lived for over 100 years. In 2003, a Houston doctor stepped into an elevator when its doors malfunctioned and suddenly closed on him. The elevator then shot upward unexpectedly before the man could fully enter, instantly severing his head and shoulders while leaving the rest of his body in the hallway outside. A young nurse inside the elevator was physically unharmed but severely traumatized after she was stuck inside the elevator with the doctor's remains for several hours. Just hours after receiving this note, he was dead. In 1992, 31-year-old Mexican singer Chelino Sanchez took the stage at a packed concert in Culiacan, Mexico. Known for his ballads about the drug trade and the lives of narcos, Chelino was no stranger to danger. In the middle of a song, a man from the crowd approached the stage and handed him a small folded note as cameras captured the moment. Chelino paused, read the note carefully, and gave a slight nod before continuing his performance, but now with a visible tension in his voice and eyes. Hours later, after leaving the venue, Chelino and his entourage were stopped by armed men posing as police. He was abducted, and hours later his body was found on a remote dirt road. His wrists had been bound, and he was shot and killed execution style. To this day, no one knows exactly what was written on that piece of paper, but many believe it was a final death threat from someone who intended to make sure Chelino's voice was silenced forever. Morbid Facts. Best known as the original voice for nearly all the female characters in South Park, prolific voice actress Mary Kay Bergman stunned the animation world in 1999 when she took her own life at the young age of 38. Despite her cheerful public persona and thriving career, she was secretly battling severe mental illness, later identified as bipolar disorder and anxiety, which she kept hidden from friends, colleagues, and even her husband, fearing it would damage her career. Mary's sudden death sent shockwaves through the voice acting community, since no one had any idea she was suffering behind the scenes. A poor spider that was posthumously named Lawrence got stuck in this glass and couldn't climb up the smooth surface, so it apparently tried to web its way to the top until its silk ran out and it eventually perished. In 2020, Russian influencer Yekaterina Didenko's 29th birthday celebration at a Moscow pool complex turned tragic when approximately 55 pounds of dry ice were poured into the swimming pool. Intended to create a fog effect, the dry ice produced a massive amount of carbon dioxide gas upon making contact with the water, leading to suffocation and chemical burns among attendees. 3 people ended up dying as a result, including Didenko's husband, who succumbed to his injuries in the hospital. Morbid Facts. On July 17, 2025, Felix Baumgartner, the daredevil who once broke the sound barrier by jumping from the edge of space, was killed in a tragic paragliding crash in Italy at the age of 56. While piloting a motorized paraglider near a seaside resort, he reportedly may have suffered a cardiac event mid-air, causing the craft to spiral out of control before slamming into the hotel's pool area. The impact killed him instantly and injured a hotel worker with flying debris, sending her to the hospital with neck trauma, but she appears to be okay. Witnesses described a terrifying boom as the glider hit, followed by screams from stunned vacationers. Paramedics arrived quickly but were unable to revive him, and guests at the hotel were left stunned as rescue workers covered his body with a tarp near the wreckage. Hours before the fatal crash, he posted an Instagram story with the caption, "Too much wind," his eerie final message before the legendary thrill-seeker met a brutal end while doing what he loved. Morbid Facts. In the summer of 1974, 18-year-old Disneyland cast member Deborah Gale was assigned to the newly opened America Sings ride in Tomorrowland, a rotating theater that featured animatronic animals singing songs from different eras of American history. The attraction had only been open for 9 days when something went horribly wrong during her shift on July 8th. At some point during the rotation, Deborah became caught in a narrow gap between a moving theater wall and a stationary platform. As the mechanism turned, she was crushed in the machinery, likely killing her immediately. Guests seated nearby heard her screams followed by a loud thud, but tragically mistook both for sound effects from the show. In 2009, a member of Al-Qaeda attempted to assassinate Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Nayef by hiding a pound of explosives inside his anus, an unprecedented tactic at the time. Disguised as a remorseful militant surrendering during Ramadan, the terrorist was allowed close access to the prince and even passed through metal detectors without detection. Once face to face, he detonated the device, but his own body absorbed most of the blast, killing him instantly while only slightly injuring the startled prince. Morbid Facts. In February of 1978, 23-year-old college student Stephen Kubacki totally vanished while cross-country skiing near Lake Michigan. His skis, poles, and backpack were found near the lake, and his footprints led onto the ice before abruptly ending, leading authorities to believe he had fallen through and drowned. But 15 months later, in May of 1979, Kubacki reappeared in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, approximately 700 miles away from where he vanished. He claimed to have no memory of the intervening time, stating he woke up in a field wearing unfamiliar clothes and carrying a backpack with maps and other items he didn't recognize. Kubacki never spoke publicly again, and the bizarre case remains unsolved. In 1559, King Henry II of France held a grand jousting tournament to celebrate his daughter's marriage, despite ominous warnings, including a prophecy that he would be pierced through the eye. During the friendly match, a lance splintered on impact, driving a wooden shard through Henry's eye and deep into his brain. Though initially conscious, he soon suffered excruciating pain, seizures, and neurological decline over 10 agonizing days before dying. His gruesome death shocked all of Europe and led to the downfall of jousting in France. Dirty facts about history that they'll never teach you in school. According to David Bowie's ex-wife Angela, she once walked in on David and Mick Jagger naked in bed together after a long night of partying. Angela took it as clear evidence of a sexual encounter, though neither Bowie nor Jagger ever confirmed it. Jagger dismissed the rumor as rubbish, while Bowie avoided commenting on it altogether. In the late 1800s, long before the invention of discrete vibrators, early models were massive mechanical contraptions powered by steam, hand cranks, or foot pedals. These devices were used by doctors to treat what was then diagnosed as female hysteria, a vague and outdated condition believed to cause anxiety, irritability, and sexual frustration. Rock Bitch, a provocative all-women British rock band infamous for their wildly sexualized live shows, had a notorious ritual during their concerts. They'd hurl a golden condom into the crowd, and whoever caught it, regardless of gender, was chosen to join them backstage for a night of uninhibited sexual escapades with the band. A 2003 study found that roughly 1 in 200 men globally share a nearly identical Y chromosome, all tracing back to one common male ancestor who lived about 800 years ago in the Mongol Empire region. The researchers linked this genetic legacy to Genghis Khan, giving the timing, geography, and his notorious reputation for spreading his seed like wildfire across his vast empire. Extra morbid facts. In Gainesville, Georgia, a group of high school students decided to prank their math teacher by toilet papering his yard late at night. When 40-year-old teacher and golf coach Jason Hughes ran outside, he was reportedly joking around and pretending to catch them in the act as they ran back to their car. But as the teens tried to speed away, Hughes slipped on the wet pavement and fell into the road. One of the students, an 18-year-old driving a pickup truck, accidentally ran him over. Hughes was rushed to the hospital but tragically died from his injuries. The driver was initially charged with first-degree vehicular homicide, while several other students were arrested for trespassing and littering. But Hughes's family later asked prosecutors to drop the charges, saying the beloved teacher cared deeply about his students and never would have wanted any of their lives destroyed over a prank. Morbid facts. Actor Daniel Hovels accidentally slit his own throat on stage during a 2008 theatrical performance after his prop knife was somehow switched out for a real one. The audience initially thought it was all just an elaborate special effect. The blade had just barely missed Hovels' carotid artery, but he was back on stage the next day. The leading cause of death for pregnant and postpartum women in America is homicide. This is often driven by partner violence that is escalated or triggered by the pregnancy, stemming from jealousy, fear of responsibility, and financial stress. In 2014, a crematorium in Virginia caught fire during the cremation of a 500-pound body. The excessive body fat caused the furnace to overheat, igniting the building's roof. A Florida musician known as Prince Midnight constructed a fully functional electric guitar he dubbed the Skelecaster, using the skeletal remains of his deceased Uncle Philip. Philip had donated his skeleton to a medical college in Greece, but after 2 decades, the school no longer had any use for them, so the remains were returned to his family. Prince Midnight decided to honor his uncle, who introduced him to heavy metal music, by turning his ribcage, spinal column, and pelvis into a guitar. Morbid facts. What producers got away with on Fear Factor was nothing short of insane. Contestants were fed blended rats, pig rectums, maggots, and even drank donkey semen and urine in a notorious episode so vile that NBC refused to air it. Injuries were common, with some participants hospitalized for stunts that went wrong, one nearly dying from hypothermia after being submerged in ice water, while others were left with concussions, whiplash, and long-term psychological trauma. Host Joe Rogan later admitted the show became absolutely insane, as producers escalated the torture for ratings, ignoring the visible misery of their contestants. Animal rights groups slammed the show for cruelty, as live insects were eaten, snakes were abused, and rats were used in disturbing stunts, all for cheap thrills. Despite its grotesque popularity, Fear Factor was finally cancelled twice, with the second cancellation triggered by the infamous Semen Challenge, which many people saw as the moment reality TV officially lost its soul. Disturbing fan theories. For decades, people have theorized that the kids show Caillou is about a young boy who died from cancer. This is why Caillou has a bald head, a very small frame, and is always whining as if he's in pain. He constantly acts like a brat right in front of his parents and always seems to get away with it because they're sympathetic to his illness. Every episode also starts out with Granny telling Rosie a story about her brother Caillou, because according to the theory, he passed away before Rosie was old enough to develop lasting memories of him. So the entire show is centered around Grandma filling Rosie in on her deceased brother. Morbid facts. Rama Haruna was born in Nigeria in 1996 and appeared healthy at birth, but at around 6 months old she suddenly became ill and her body stopped developing normally. As she got older, most of her body stopped growing and she lost the ability to sit or stand, leaving her with a severely shortened torso and almost no functioning limbs. While her body remained extremely small, her head continued to grow and age normally, creating a striking contrast that doctors were never able to fully explain. Because she couldn't move on her own, Rama's family often carried her around in a large plastic bucket so she could leave the house. Despite constant pain, she remained mentally sharp and spoke about wanting to live a normal life. She died in 2016 at the age of 19 after living her entire life with the unexplained condition. In the 1840s, Anarcha Westcott, an enslaved black woman, was forced to undergo about 30 experimental gynecological surgeries performed by Dr. J. Marion Sims, who was later known as the father of modern gynecology. Sims was apparently trying to repair childbirth injuries called fistulas, and the procedures were carried out without anesthesia at a time when many physicians believed African Americans couldn't feel pain. Although his techniques influenced early gynecology, Anarcha has come to symbolize how much medical advancement was built on the suffering of enslaved women. Today, she's remembered as one of the mothers of gynecology, not for a discovery she chose, but for what she was forced to endure. Morbid facts. Back-to-back incidents helped solidify the pile driver's reputation as one of wrestling's most dangerous moves and led to stricter safety protocols in the WWE. This was the moment drivers on a highway in San Antonio, Texas realized something was seriously wrong with the man behind a drifting SUV. Recognizing a medical emergency, 29-year-old Rene Valerio Albi pulled his truck in front of the SUV and gradually slowed down, allowing the runaway vehicle to bump into his bumper until both eventually came to a stop. The driver had suffered a heart attack, and a nurse who stopped at the scene began administering CPR, helping to revive him until paramedics arrived. Doctors said he's expected to make a full recovery thanks to the quick actions of a few strangers. Here's an insane clip of a man narrowly avoiding a horrific death by elevator. Commenters pointed out that he's lucky enough he didn't get crushed, but he also could have easily fallen down the shaft once the elevator moved. Here's a horrifying scene as tourists desperately flee an erupting Mount Etna in Sicily as thick plumes of ash and smoke rise behind them. Mount Etna is Europe's most active volcano and one of the most active in the world, erupting frequently as magma constantly pushes toward the surface beneath the mountain. Despite its constant activity, most eruptions involve slow-moving ash plumes that give people enough time to evacuate. Deaths from this volcano are extremely rare in modern times, though hikers and tourists have occasionally been injured after getting too close to active craters. Morbid facts. In 2002, New York City bartender Sean Doyle was out drinking with his friend Michael Wright when a drunken argument suddenly broke out after Wright accused Doyle of flirting with his girlfriend. In a fit of rage, Wright threw Doyle down an open manhole and he immediately started screaming in agony from below. The shaft led down to a steam tunnel where a ruptured vent had caused the water temperature to reach an estimated 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Doyle survived the fall and was pleading for help while trapped in the boiling water, but the heat and steam were far too intense for rescuers to reach him. Witnesses reported hearing his screams echoing through the streets like a whistling tea kettle, then abruptly stopping. His body was finally recovered 4 hours later, and the medical examiner later described the scene as one of the worst she'd ever seen. The metal of his belt buckle had partially fused with his pelvis, and steam had filled up his lungs until they completely ruptured. His skin had completely peeled away, and his organs were essentially steamed like a lobster. Morbid facts. Chef Anthony Bourdain often described his life as something he wasn't supposed to still have. In the 1980s, while working as a chef in New York City, he fell into a severe heroin addiction, using daily, stealing from coworkers, and living in a constant state of physical and mental collapse. He later admitted he fully expected to die young during that period and was surprised he survived it at all. When fame arrived years later after writing Kitchen Confidential, Bourdain said that sudden success in many ways was more dangerous than addiction, giving him money, access, and non-stop travel that nearly pulled him back into self-destructive behavior. While filming No Reservations and Parts Unknown, he spent years moving through regions marked by executions, cartel violence, and war, repeatedly confronting death up close until he said it began to feel disturbingly ordinary. Even as his career thrived, Bourdain acknowledged that depression never truly left him, describing it as something that doesn't disappear but waits in the shadows, a statement that would take on a far darker meaning after he took his own life in 2018. One of the dumbest crimes in history, an Arizona man who worked for UPS stole a diamond worth $160,000, then traded it for some weed. Instead of selling it or hiding it, he handed the massive gemstone to his dealer for a $20 bag of marijuana. The dealer, shocked by how valuable it looked, brought it to a jewelry store to get it appraised, and the person behind the counter instantly recognized it as stolen. Police were called, and within days, both the thief and the dealer were arrested. In the end, the man didn't just waste a life-changing fortune, he basically turned himself in for the price of a dub. On the other hand, in 1968 Japan, a man pulled off one of the most brilliant heists in history without the use of a single weapon. Disguised as a motorcycle cop, he pulled over a bank vehicle carrying over $10 million in cash and claimed it was rigged to explode. To make it believable, he lit a flare underneath the car and yelled for the employees to run. They bolted in fear as he calmly got in, drove off with all the cash, and vanished. Despite the largest manhunt Japan had ever seen, interviewing over 100,000 people, neither the thief nor the money has ever been found. Morbid facts. Jordan James Park, the British influencer known as the Lip King, has died at age 34 after a suspected complication linked to a cosmetic procedure. Park gained notoriety for spending more than $150,000 on surgeries and even appeared on the reality show Botched, where doctors warned him about the risks tied to extreme fillers and repeated operations. Police are currently treating his death as unexplained, while a man and woman were arrested on suspicion of manslaughter as the investigation continues. The case has quickly sparked renewed discussion about the dangers of unregulated cosmetic work and the overwhelming pressure created by online beauty trends. In October of 2011, 2-year-old Wang Yu wandered into a market street in Foshan, China, where she was struck by a van and left critically injured in the road. Surveillance footage later showed dozens of pedestrians and drivers passing by without intervening before a second truck ran her over. After several minutes, a female waste collector finally moved her to safety, but the child tragically died a few hours later from her injuries. The case sparked worldwide debate about bystander behavior, public responsibility, and the social pressures that may discourage people from intervening in emergencies. Morbid facts. During a low-speed car crash in Georgia, what should have been a routine airbag deployment turned into a life-altering injury for Hannah Oliver. The collision occurred at roughly 25 miles per hour, but when the airbag deployed, it shattered the designer glasses she was wearing, driving fragments into her eye. Doctors later determined the damage was irreversible and Hannah went blind in that eye. But in the aftermath, she channeled the trauma into action, later launching a shatter-resistant sunglasses brand to prevent the same injury from happening to others. A young Arkansas couple pleaded guilty after attempting to sell their 2-month-old baby at a campground for $1,000 and a 6-pack of beer. The deal was written out in a handwritten contract and witnessed by others, one of whom alerted police. Authorities recovered the infant and charged the parents with child endangerment and attempting to accept compensation for adoption. The father was sentenced to prison time while the mother received probation, and both were permanently barred from contact with the child, who was placed in protective care. Here are some morbid facts about Halloween. At his 2011 Halloween party, Neil Patrick Harris served a cake designed to look like the rotting corpse of Amy Winehouse, complete with a mangled face, matted hair, blood-red frosting, a cigarette hanging from its mouth, and a tag reading, "The Corpse of Amy Winehouse." The photo resurfaced years later and drew massive backlash, especially since Winehouse had died from alcohol poisoning just 3 months before the party. Harris later apologized, calling it a regrettable choice. Many animal shelters refuse to let black cats be adopted around Halloween time, fearing they'll be tortured, sacrificed, or used as props in satanic rituals. Legendary illusionist Harry Houdini died on Halloween night in 1926 after his appendix burst, reportedly triggered when a fan punched him to test his strength. Before his death, he promised his wife he'd try to contact her from beyond the grave every Halloween, sparking seances that still continue to this day. In 1990, 32-year-old magician Joe Burris tried to outdo Houdini by being buried alive in a plexiglass coffin under 7 tons of dirt and cement. But the coffin collapsed instantly, crushing him to death on Halloween night, just like his idol. Statistically, Halloween is the deadliest day of the year for child pedestrians by far. Kids are 3 times more likely to be hit by a car while trick-or-treating than any other day of the year. 8-year-old Timothy Bryan died on Halloween night in 1974 after eating cyanide-laced candy given to him by his own father, who hoped to cash in on his life insurance policy. The Candyman case sparked the nationwide panic about poisoned Halloween candy, but it was the only true case of it happening ever recorded. In dozens of states, registered sex offenders are required by law to keep their porch lights off, avoid Halloween decorations, and have no contact with children on Halloween. Some cities even enforce curfews and random compliance checks on Halloween night. On an October night in 1997, students at Cornell University woke up to find a pumpkin impaled on the tip of the 173-foot spire of McGraw Tower. No one saw it placed there, no ropes, cranes, or ladders were ever found, and no one took credit. The pumpkin stayed perched for months, slowly rotting through the winter before being removed in March, an incredible Halloween mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Morbid facts. Before fame, Shania Twain was already carrying adult burdens as a child, singing in bars until 1 a.m. at the age of 8 just to help keep her family afloat. But in 1987, that fragile stability was suddenly destroyed when her mother and stepfather were killed in a violent car accident after their vehicle was struck head-on by a truck driven by a drunk driver. Shania was only 22 when she became the legal guardian of her 4 younger siblings, putting her music career on hold to raise them and keep the family together, stepping into survival mode years before the world ever knew her name. Christopher Tapp spent more than 20 years in prison for the 1996 murder of 18-year-old Angie Dodge, a crime he didn't commit. Police had coerced a false confession out of him, even though none of the DNA at the scene matched. In 2019, genetic genealogy finally identified the real killer, leading to Tapp's full exoneration and a record-breaking $11.7 million settlement he received in 2022. But less than a year after finally reclaiming his life, Tapp was found beaten and unresponsive in a Las Vegas hotel room after an altercation. The coroner ruled his death a homicide, and a former pro wrestler was later charged. This was the moment Diana Lovejoy collapsed in court after being found guilty of plotting to kill her ex-husband, Greg Mulvihill. Locked in a bitter custody battle over their young son, Lovejoy feared losing her boy and conspired with her firearms instructor, Weldon McDavid Jr., to eliminate Mulvihill. In 2016, she lured her ex-husband to a remote dirt road where McDavid ambushed him with a rifle. Shot in the torso, Mulvihill survived by playing dead and calling 911. Investigators traced the attack back to Lovejoy and McDavid, and both were convicted. She received 26 years to life, while he was sentenced to 50 years. Doctors across the world have documented shocking cases of patients arriving in the ER with objects lodged deep inside their bodies. But one of the strangest in history involved a 5-pound dumbbell. The patient arrived in agonizing pain but refused to explain how it got there, forcing surgeons to perform a delicate operation to extract it. Britain's most prolific executioner, Albert Pierrepoint, spent 25 years hanging up to 600 criminals, but it was only his side hustle. By day, he ran a pub where locals drank with him, knowing full well he was also the hangman. In 1950, one of his own regulars, a man he nicknamed Tish, was convicted of murder and sentenced to death, and it was Pierrepoint himself who placed the noose around his neck and carried out the execution. Morbid facts. In August of 2020, 5-year-old Cannon Hanent was riding his bike outside of his Wilson, North Carolina home when his 25-year-old neighbor, Darius Sessoms, suddenly walked up and shot him point-blank in the head in front of his 2 sisters. The murder was described as execution style and left the community completely stunned, especially since Sessoms had shared dinner with Cannon's family just days prior. He was arrested within 24 hours and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, receiving life in prison without the possibility of parole. To this day, no clear motive has ever been revealed. Here's a photo of George Lincoln Rockwell, founder of the American Nazi Party, at a 1967 rally. Rockwell built his movement around hate-filled rallies in open admiration for Hitler. But his end came not at the hands of his enemies. In August of 1967, Rockwell was gunned down outside of a laundromat in Arlington, Virginia, shot twice through his car window by John Patler, a bitter former ally he had recently expelled from the party. The man who preached violence and division was assassinated by one of his own followers, leaving the American Nazi Party leaderless and fractured. Morbid facts. November 10th, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, one of the largest freighters to ever sail the Great Lakes, vanished without a single distress call. She was hauling 26,000 tons of iron ore across Lake Superior, a route sailors today still call the graveyard of the Great Lakes. As a brutal storm ripped across the lake, wind gusts reached hurricane force and waves rose over 30 feet. Nearby ships radioed that the Fitzgerald was taking whitewater over the deck, and her radar was down, vents smashed, and one of her lifeboats already torn apart by the waves. At 7:10 p.m., Captain Ernest McSorley made his final transmission, "We are holding our own." Minutes later, the 729-foot ship dropped off radar completely. When search teams managed to locate the wreck 2 days later, the bow was found buried more than 20 feet into the lake bed, showing how quick the ship plummeted through the water. The crew quarters were crushed flat, showing how violently the ship hit the bottom. So fast, the men never even reached their emergency stations. Divers later found crew hard hats still sitting neatly in their storage racks. All 29 crew members were lost, as not a single body was ever recovered. While the exact cause of the sinking still remains a mystery, many experts believe the Fitzgerald was struck by a rare Three Sisters, a set of massive rogue waves that can swallow a vessel in seconds, snapping the large ship in two and sending all 29 men to their graves 530 feet below the surface. In 1995, divers retrieved the ship's bell, the only piece ever brought to the surface, and replaced it with a memorial bell engraved with all 29 names. Every November 10th, it's rung 29 times, one toll for each life lost. Here's some insanely rare footage of a siphonophore, a deep-sea colony that looks more like an alien or sea creature than anything from Earth. Even though they appear to be a single creature, they're actually colonies made up of thousands of tiny bodies called zooids, each assigned a specific role like feeding, reproduction, or movement. Some species can grow longer than a blue whale, trailing glowing tentacles through the dark to sting and capture prey. Because they're extremely delicate and live thousands of feet below the surface, clear footage of siphonophores in their natural environment is rarely captured. Here's some footage of the only volcano in the world famous for its blue lava, Indonesia's Kawah Ijen. What you're seeing isn't actually blue molten rock, but sulfuric gas is igniting as they escape the crater, creating electric blue flames that can flow down the slope like liquid fire at night. The effect is only visible in darkness, which is why most clips are filmed after sunset. Miners still descend into the crater through toxic fumes to collect sulfur, working inside one of the most extreme volcanic environments on Earth. Morbid facts. After his mother's death in 1989, actor Michael Caine discovered a family secret she'd hidden for over half a century. He had an older half-brother named David who'd spent his entire life confined to a psychiatric hospital. His mother had given birth to David long before marrying Michael's father, but when the boy developed severe epilepsy and was institutionalized as a teen, she told everyone she was just visiting a cousin each week, never revealing the truth even to her own sons. Caine only learned of David's existence when he was in his 50s, realizing that while he was building a life of fame and fortune, his brother was wasting away in a mental asylum and died completely forgotten. Just a century ago, a Down syndrome diagnosis was a death sentence, as parents were often told not to get too attached. In the early 1900s, the average life expectancy was barely 12 years. Most children died from infections or heart defects long before adulthood, often abandoned in mental hospitals and forgotten by their families. Even by the 1980s, very few people with Down syndrome lived past 25. But today, medicine and compassion have finally caught up. Thanks to modern care and advancements in heart surgery, people with Down syndrome now live well into their 60s and beyond. Proof that what was once a tragedy of neglect is now a story of survival. Morbid facts. January of 2015, a walker passing through Squirrelwood Scout Camp near Doncaster, England, stumbled upon a sight so grimly bizarre that it made national headlines. Wedged headfirst in a rabbit hole was the body of 50-year-old Stephen Winfrey, a local hunter who had gone missing the day before after taking his dog out to catch rabbits. Investigators pieced together that Winfrey likely tried to reach into the burrow to grab his prey, when his torso became trapped at an angle so tight he couldn't breathe or pull himself free. He eventually suffocated in the confined space, his legs still sticking out of the earth as if frozen mid-stride. When rescuers found him, his body was so firmly wedged that it took hours to dislodge, and soil had compacted around his face like a coffin of dirt. His loyal dog was found alive tied to a nearby tree but was trembling and dehydrated, having watched helplessly as its owner got stuck and slowly ran out of air. The coroner ruled his horrifying death an accidental asphyxiation. Morbid facts. Tara Calico was a 19-year-old University of New Mexico student who disappeared on September 20th, 1988 while riding her bike near her home in Belen, New Mexico. She never returned, and no physical evidence of her fate was ever found. 3 months after she went missing, a Polaroid was discovered in a Florida parking lot, showing a young woman and a boy bound and gagged inside a van. Tara's family believed the woman closely resembled her, noting similar facial features and a scar consistent with Tara's medical history. But the photo was never definitively identified or traced to its source. Tara Calico was never found, the boy in the photo was never identified, and no arrests were ever made. In 2023, Delbert Cornish shot and killed his 18-year-old daughter, Hope Onyx Cornish, inside their home in Caldwell, Idaho. After killing her, he also shot and killed her pet cat. Cornish later admitted to the killings, telling police, "My kids died by my hand." At the time of her death, Hope had reportedly been turning her life around. Family members said she'd been sober for more than a year, was working, and had recently started building more stability in her life. But despite this, Cornish told investigators he killed her and her cat because he was, quote, tired of them being made fun of. Authorities found no evidence of provocation or self-defense and said the killing was deliberate. Cornish later pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. Morbid facts. When Disney casted Tim Allen as the Santa Claus in 1994, the studio quietly broke its own rule against hiring ex-convicts. Back in 1978, he was arrested at the airport while trying to smuggle more than a pound of cocaine and faced a possible life sentence before cutting a deal to inform on other dealers. He spent over 2 years in federal prison, getting out in 1981, then spent the next decade rebuilding his career until Home Improvement turned him into a star in 1991. So by the time Disney handed him the lead role in the Santa Claus, they were making one of the rarest casting exceptions in company history, turning a former federal prisoner into the face of Christmas. A recent medical case from Denmark describes a 39-year-old man who died within 26 hours after drinking water from a coconut that had been sitting unrefrigerated on a kitchen table for more than a month. When he punctured it with a straw, he noticed it tasted strange but kept drinking. Inside, the coconut had become contaminated with Aspergillus flavus, a fungus that produces aflatoxin, one of the most potent natural liver poisons known. Within hours, he developed abdominal pain, vomiting, and liver failure. And despite emergency treatment, he died the next day from drinking coconut water. Morbid facts. While preparing for his Joker role in Suicide Squad, Jared Leto tried so hard to be edgy that he terrified his own castmates. He reportedly mailed them a dead pig, bullets, pornographic objects, and even a live rat. Some actors also claimed he sent used condoms, though Leto denied this. But multiple sources insist the gifts were so revolting that people genuinely felt unsafe around him. Despite all of his extreme method acting, most of Leto's scenes didn't even make the final movie. And when it finally came out, fans and critics agreed his Joker was one of the worst interpretations ever put on screen. In 1937, 20-year-old Patricia Douglas was hired for what she thought was a film job, only to be taken to a booze-filled MGM party where she was forced to drink and brutally raped by a salesman inside a car. Instead of taking hush money, she did the unthinkable for the era. She filed a lawsuit against MGM, publicly accusing the studio of covering up the crime. But she would find out the hard way that MGM was untouchable. They paid off witnesses, falsified medical records, smeared her as a drunken prostitute, stalked her, and blacklisted her from Hollywood. The case was dismissed, the press mocked her, and her life was completely destroyed. Patricia vanished from the public eye, and Hollywood buried her story for nearly 70 years, until the truth was finally uncovered after she died in 2003. Morbid facts. MF Doom, the masked supervillain of hip-hop, died in a way just as mysterious as the persona he created. On Halloween Day in 2020, he passed away at 49, but his death was kept completely secret for 62 days. For 2 months, fans continued listening to his music and waiting for new projects, unaware that he was already gone. Then on New Year's Eve, his wife quietly announced his passing, but gave no cause of death or any further details. To this day, the circumstances remain undisclosed, sparking endless speculation. It felt strangely fitting. Doom built his entire identity around mystery and anonymity, sometimes even sending imposters to perform in his place. In the end, he died on Halloween, vanished in silence, and left behind one final mystery. In 1929, 6-year-old Carl Newton Mahan became the youngest person in American history to be charged with murder, then sat in a courtroom playing with a doll. The Kentucky boy had gotten into a fight with an 8-year-old named Cecil Van Hoos over a piece of scrap metal. Cecil reportedly slapped him, so Carl ran home, grabbed his father's shotgun, and blasted the older boy, killing him instantly. Because of the shocking nature of the crime, Carl was actually put on trial for murder, sitting in the courtroom so young that they had to give him toys to keep him calm. The jury found him guilty of manslaughter and sentenced him to 15 years in reform school, but the conviction was quickly overturned due to public outrage. This was a video of a man playing with a blue-ringed octopus, completely oblivious that he's handling one of the most lethal animals on the planet. The tiny octopus contains tetrodotoxin, a venom powerful enough to kill an adult human within minutes, causing total paralysis while leaving the victim fully conscious and aware of what's happening. A single bite can shut down the lungs, stopping breathing as the body becomes unable to move or cry for help. There's no antidote, and survival depends entirely on immediate artificial ventilation until the toxin wears off. Even worse, blue-ringed octopuses often bite painlessly, meaning the man wouldn't even realize he's been bitten until his muscles begin to fail. Extra morbid facts. Part 2007, 13-year-old Paris Bennett murdered his 4-year-old sister Ella in what investigators later called one of the most calculated juvenile killings ever recorded. Despite having a near-genius IQ, Paris waited until their babysitter fell asleep, then stabbed Ella 17 times as she desperately cried for help. Afterward, he calmly called 911, pretending to perform CPR while knowingly letting her bleed out, later admitting he understood exactly how long she had before she couldn't be saved. Detectives and psychologists say the killing was deliberate revenge. Paris wanted to devastate his mother Charity since he apparently felt abandoned when she focused more on his sister and resented the stability she was building after years of struggling. He believed taking Ella from her would cause the greatest possible pain. A Texas court ultimately sentenced him to 40 years in prison, and even today he shows no remorse, openly acknowledging he targeted Ella solely to cause maximum emotional damage to his mother. Morbid facts. In 2008, 18-year-old Joshua Maddox left his home in Woodland Park, Colorado for a short walk and was never seen again. 7 years later, his mummified body was discovered inside the chimney of an abandoned cabin less than a mile from his house. He was found in a fetal position wearing only a thermal shirt with his other clothes neatly folded nearby. The coroner ruled his death an accident, suggesting he tried to enter the cabin through the chimney and became trapped. But the bizarre details, his position, the missing clothing, and the fact that the chimney was blocked off from the inside have fueled theories that Joshua didn't end up there by accident but was placed there by someone else. In 1930, a mannequin appeared in the window of a bridal shop in Chihuahua, Mexico, so lifelike that locals swore she wasn't made of wax at all. Her glass eyes, detailed hands, and visible veins fueled rumors that she was the embalmed body of the shop owner's daughter, a bride who died on her wedding day. Nicknamed La Pascualita, she's remained on display for nearly a century, still leaving visitors to wonder if they're looking at a mannequin or a corpse in a wedding dress. Here's a photo of an archaeologist cradling the cast of a young child who died instantly in the Pompeii eruption in 79 AD. The plaster casts of Pompeii's victims were created from empty voids in hardened ash, molds where human bodies once lay. Archaeologists filled them with plaster, revealing faces twisted in terror, immortalized in volcanic stone. A 3rd century BC Roman mosaic shows a skeleton reclining next to bread and wine, raising a cup with the words, "Be cheerful, enjoy life." In 2023, a 2,700-year-old 18-ton Assyrian statue was unearthed in Iraq, its massive form depicting a god whose worshippers died off millennia ago. It had waited underground since long before the birth of Jesus Christ. This portrait of an unidentified Egyptian man was laid over his mummified body nearly 2,000 years ago during the Roman period in Egypt. Painted on linden wood using colored wax, it was meant to preserve his likeness for eternity. Hidden for centuries beneath Italian forests, a massive Etruscan pyramid altar was rediscovered in the 1990s. Carved directly into rock 2,600 years ago, it may have once run red with the blood of ritual offerings to forgotten gods. Carved from mammoth ivory 33,000 years ago, this tiny bird from a prehistoric cave in Germany is the oldest known depiction of a creature. As far as we know, the artist who made it never lived to see a wheel, a written word, or the dawn of recorded history. Morbid facts. Victoria Wright was born with cherubism, a rare genetic disorder that causes the bones in the lower face to grow erratically, giving her a swollen, distorted appearance that drew cruel comments from strangers her entire life. The condition can be extremely painful by tightening the jaw, straining the facial nerves, and making basic things like chewing or even speaking very difficult at times. As a child, she endured constant looks, bullying, and even adults snickering about her in public as if she wasn't standing right there. But instead of hiding, she turned her diagnosis into a mission, calling out the cruelty she faced after a BBC documentary sparked a wave of online abuse and becoming a fierce advocate for people with facial differences. In 2015, Mary Cerruti vanished from her Houston bungalow without a trace. 2 years later, the new owners found her skeletal remains sealed inside a wall along with her glasses and shoes. Investigators believe she fell through the attic floor and became trapped, slowly dying alone in total darkness with no way of climbing out. But because she was one of the last homeowners refusing to sell as developers closed in around her, many people still suspect something darker. Her official cause of death remains undetermined. In honor of Part 9/11, here are the most morbid facts I've ever posted about 9/11. In 1983, professional climber Dan Goodwin illegally climbed the North Tower of the World Trade Center. He said he was trying to bring attention to the inability to rescue trapped occupants of the upper levels of skyscrapers. In August of 2001, actor James Woods reported 4 suspicious men on his flight, but authorities didn't take his claims seriously. Turns out there were 4 of the hijackers who would go on to crash into the World Trade Center, and this was one of their test runs. Afghan resistance leader Ahmad Shah Massoud warned about a major terrorist attack that was about to happen on U.S. soil, but he ended up being assassinated just 2 days before 9/11. An FBI counterterrorism expert John O'Neill urged the federal government to take the threat of Al-Qaeda more seriously, but he was eventually pushed into early retirement due to disagreements with the Bureau. He went on to head security at the World Trade Center, where he was killed on 9/11. Seth MacFarlane and Mark Wahlberg were both booked to fly on American Airlines Flight 11, the first plane that crashed into the World Trade Center. But Wahlberg decided last minute to fly to Toronto instead, while MacFarlane missed the flight by 10 minutes due to a hangover. Released in June of 2000, video game Deus Ex didn't include the World Trade Center in its skyline due to technical limitations. The in-game explanation was that they were destroyed in a terrorist attack. In August of 2000, the band Dream Theater recorded a live studio album called Live Scenes from New York. The album cover art features the New York City skyline with the Twin Towers on fire. Most disturbingly, the album was quickly pulled from shelves after coincidentally being released on September 11, 2001. Only one non-military plane was allowed to fly after all commercial flights were forced to land. It was delivering anti-venom to a snake handler in Florida who was bitten by the highly venomous taipan snake. Sculptor Michael Richards was killed in his art studio on the 92nd floor of the North Tower on 9/11. His art ironically focused on planes, including a sculpture of airplanes piercing a cast of his own body. This iconic photograph of 28-year-old Marcy Borders covered in dust was taken just after the World Trade Center collapsed. Marcy was a bank teller who worked on the 81st floor of the North Tower. She survived the collapse but sadly died from cancer in 2014, likely caused by the toxic fumes she was exposed to. The only off-duty NYPD officer who was killed in 9/11 had signed his retirement papers that morning, but instead of leaving his badge, John William Perry decided to pick it up one last time. Here's a photo of Pork Chop the search dog receiving fluids and comfort before returning to his duties. Many 9/11 rescue dogs were becoming depressed because they weren't finding any live bodies. Rescue workers had to constantly bury themselves to trick the dogs into thinking they were actually saving someone. Tanya Head was a well-known 9/11 survivor who faked being in the South Tower during the attacks. She served as president of the World Trade Center Survivors Network for years until it was revealed she wasn't even in the country on 9/11. Known as the Meteor, this was the result of 5 floors of the World Trade Center being compressed together after the towers collapsed. It's not known if there are any human remains inside. Long after the cleanup, body parts were still being recovered. In 2006, the arm of a victim was found on the roof of a nearby bank. And as recently as 2013, fragments of human remains were discovered on top of a Manhattan rooftop more than a decade after the attacks. In 2002, a 15-year-old boy became inspired by the terrorist attacks on 9/11. He decided to steal an airplane and fly it into a building in Tampa, Florida. It ended up only damaging one office room, and he was the only person that died. Since 9/11, more than 40,000 people have been diagnosed with cancers and chronic illnesses linked to the toxic dust released when the towers collapsed, a debris cloud made up of pulverized concrete, asbestos, fuel, and materials from office equipment and lighting systems. More first responders have died from 9/11 related illnesses than on the actual day of 9/11. Even nearly 25 years after the attacks, victims of 9/11 are still being identified. In 2025, 3 more people were named through advanced DNA testing, using tiny fragments recovered from the World Trade Center site. But of the 2,977 victims, 1,100 of them still have no identified remains. This may be the most disturbing Valentine's Day gift of all time. South African trophy hunter Marilies van der Merwe drew backlash after killing a 17-year-old bull giraffe during a Valentine's Day hunt her husband reportedly paid for. After shooting the animal, she cut out its heart and presented it to her husband as a Valentine's Day gift, later posting photos with it online. The images quickly went viral and sparked criticism worldwide, but she defended the hunt by saying regulated trophy hunts generate permit fees that go toward wildlife management, anti-poaching efforts, and local land conservation, and that older, non-breeding animals are often selected to reduce pressure on habitats. In 2020, a Dollar General employee with diabetes was fired after drinking a $2 orange juice at the register when she began feeling symptoms of diabetic shock. The company said she violated policy by consuming merchandise before paying for it, labeling the act as grazing even though she later paid for the drink. The dispute escalated into a lawsuit, and a jury ultimately awarded her $277,000 in damages, turning the incident into a widely discussed example of strict workplace policy clashing with a medical emergency. Extra morbid facts. This photo shows 15-year-old Preston Porter Jr. reading a Bible as he's led by rope toward his own execution by a lynch mob in Colorado in 1900. He'd been held and tortured for 4 days, beaten until he finally confessed to killing a white girl after police told him his father and brother would also be lynched if he didn't comply. Still a child, Preston was denied a trial and handed over to a crowd that had already decided his fate. He was tied to a stake and burned alive in public as excited spectators watched. Despite the coerced confession, his age, and the brutality involved, Preston was never posthumously exonerated. No official apology was issued, no conviction was overturned, and no one was held accountable. Morbid facts. This haunting photo shows an early radiation therapy session from the 1930s when doctors used x-rays to burn away skin diseases or tumors with terrifyingly primitive equipment. The patient's head was clamped perfectly still so doctors could fire high-dose radiation at specific areas of the face. Because the dangers of radiation were barely understood, patients often suffered brutal side effects: severe burns, scarring, hair loss, blindness, and even cancer years later. In some cases, radiation was even used to treat acne or blemishes, causing far more damage than the condition itself. In May of 1973, a man walked into a bank in Ontario with a rifle and a bomb wired inside his own mouth. The device was connected to a dead man's switch, meaning if he released the pressure or was killed, it would immediately explode. He calmly took hostages and demanded money, claiming there was another larger bomb hidden inside the bank. When he tried to leave the building with a bag of cash, police snipers opened fire. The moment he was hit, the switch released, detonating the bomb in his mouth and blowing up his head and upper body in front of everyone. Investigators later found a second device inside the bank containing 200 sticks of dynamite that could have wiped out the entire building, but it was luckily diffused. The man carried several fake IDs and was so badly mutilated that he's never been identified. Morbid facts. In the 1950s, doctors at Tulane University, led by Dr. Robert Heath, conducted one of the most disturbing neuroscience experiments in history. They implanted an electrode into a woman's brain, right in the region responsible for pleasure, and gave her a button that let her trigger it whenever she wanted. The result was terrifying. She began pressing the button non-stop for hours, then days, completely abandoning her family, her responsibilities, and even basic hygiene. She refused to eat or sleep, ignored everyone around her, and focused only on getting another jolt of artificial euphoria. She pressed it so obsessively that she developed an open, bleeding sore on her finger, but kept going anyway. When doctors finally took the device away, she begged them to give it back, became depressed and agitated, and even showed withdrawal-like symptoms because nothing in real life gave her pleasure anymore. The case horrified researchers so badly that human pleasure center experiments were largely shut down because it proved that if you could manually trigger happiness, it might destroy your ability to live without it. This was the moment an Indonesian conservationist broke down in tears after finally witnessing one of the rarest flowers on Earth bloom. After searching the rainforests of Sumatra for 13 years, Diki Andriki and his team found a Rafflesia, a parasitic flower often nicknamed a corpse flower because it releases a powerful odor of rotting flesh to attract insects. The plant spends most of its life hidden inside a host vine and only blooms for a few days, making sightings incredibly rare as researchers never even see one in their lifetime. When the massive, foul-smelling flower began to open in front of him, the weight of more than a decade of dangerous jungle expeditions and failed searches finally hit. This is one of the rarest atmospheric events ever caught on video. Upward lightning erupting from the summit of Volcán de Agua in Guatemala. The bolts appear to tear straight out of the volcano, making it look less like weather and more like something unnatural unfolding in real time. Unlike normal lightning that strikes downward from clouds, this phenomenon shoots upward from the ground into the storm above, triggered by intense electrical imbalance. It's so uncommon that storm chasers never even see it once in their lifetime, and it's almost never captured this clearly over a populated city. Morbid facts. In 1978, San Francisco was left shaken when disgruntled former city supervisor Dan White snuck into City Hall through a basement window and gunned down Mayor George Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk in cold blood. At trial, prosecutors expected an easy murder conviction, but White's lawyers argued that he was deeply depressed, pointing to drastic lifestyle changes, including a diet of sugary junk food like Twinkies, as proof of his unraveling mental state. The bizarre argument, later mocked as the Twinkie defense, convinced jurors to downgrade his charges from murder to voluntary manslaughter. White was sentenced to just over 7 years, but walked free after barely serving 5. The shocking leniency sparked outrage across San Francisco, fueling the violent White Night riots and leaving the city completely haunted by the fact that the man who assassinated both its mayor and his supervisor spent less time in prison than many would serve for petty crimes. In case you don't feel like watching the whole documentary, here are some morbid facts about Ed Gein. Ed Gein is one of the most disturbing killers in American history, not because of how many people he killed, but because of what police found inside of his farmhouse. Although he was only confirmed to have murdered 2 women, he spent years digging up corpses of women who looked like his mother, whom he was obsessed with, and bringing them home to turn their bodies into art pieces. When investigators entered his home, they found a nightmarish scene straight out of a horror movie. Bowls made from human skulls, chairs upholstered with skin, masks of faces peeled from corpses hung on the walls, a box filled with severed noses, and even lips nailed to a window shade pull cord. He had a belt made of nipples and made corsets and leggings out of human skin, all part of his plan to build a full woman suit so he could wear it and become his dead mother. Ed even admitted he tried to dig up his own mother's corpse, but gave up because she was too heavy. One of his 2 victims, Bernice Warden's body, was found hanging upside down in his shed, gutted like a deer, and police also discovered a human heart in a paper bag near the stove because he wanted to cook it later. Neighbors later reported seeing a strange female figure dancing in the moonlight on his property, most likely Gein wearing one of his skin suits outside. The horror was so extreme that multiple officers who investigated his farmhouse quit the force from trauma, and despite his house being a rotting, corpse-filled disaster, he kept his mother's bedroom pristine and untouched like a shrine. Perhaps the most chilling part of all was that the townspeople thought he was completely harmless. He babysat their kids and did chores while secretly wearing the dead in his spare time. Declared insane rather than executed, he lived quietly in a mental institution doing arts and crafts with paper instead of human body parts, until his death when people robbed his grave and stole his headstone as a trophy. Ed Gein's crimes were so grotesque and twisted that he became the direct inspiration for characters like Norman Bates, Leatherface, and Buffalo Bill, forever defining the skin-wearing, mother-obsessed killer in horror. Morbid facts. Jeff Garcia, best known for being the voice of Sheen in Jimmy Neutron, died on December 10, 2025 at age 50 after a terrible chain of medical emergencies that began months earlier. He first suffered a brain aneurysm that caused him to collapse and hit his head, then later endured a stroke that left his health severely weakened. After a bout of pneumonia and repeated hospital visits for trouble breathing, Jeff's condition crashed when one of his lungs suddenly collapsed, forcing doctors to place him on life support. His family ultimately made the decision to pull the plug, ending a rapid decline that left fans stunned. That same day, veteran voice actor Jim Ward, who played Doug Dimmadome, owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome, and dozens of other roles, died at 66 after years of complications with advanced Alzheimer's disease. Ward had already retired from voice work several years earlier as the disease progressed, losing his ability to continue performing before eventually requiring long-term care. According to his wife, the disease steadily deteriorated his health until his death on December 11, 2025. Together, their deaths marked the losses of 2 of the most iconic voices of Nickelodeon cartoons. This was the moment when officers found Marvin Morales lying unresponsive on the floor of a station bathroom. A California sheriff's deputy who just overdosed on cocaine he'd stolen from people he arrested, which later tested positive for fentanyl. Deputies had to rush in and administer Narcan to revive him, and he was fired soon afterward. But on December 2nd, 2025, Morales resurfaced in the most horrific way imaginable. That morning, he stabbed his 11-year-old son multiple times inside their own home, while the boy's 6-year-old sister hid nearby, too terrified to move. Deputies who arrived described blood pooled near the entryway, and signs the boy had tried to crawl toward the front door. Morales fled before anyone could reach him, leading to a pursuit down Interstate 5 that ended when spike strips shredded his tires. As the car crashed to a stop, he reportedly drew a weapon, forcing officers who had worked with him in the past to shoot him. Morales died hours later at the hospital, while the sheriff called the crime one of the most devastating his department had ever encountered. Morbid facts. On March 4th, 1994, beloved comedian John Candy died of a heart attack at the young age of 43 while filming for Wagons East in Durango, Mexico. Candy long feared he would suffer the same fate as his father, who had also died of a heart attack at a young age. After years of struggling with weight issues, heavy smoking, and earlier drug use, Candy died in his sleep in the middle of production for the film. His death stunned Hollywood, and he was so beloved that when his body was returned to Los Angeles, police took the extraordinary step of shutting down the notoriously busy 405 freeway so his funeral procession could pass uninterrupted, a tribute typically preserved for presidents and other heads of state. On September 24, 2005, Mark Dixie spent his 35th birthday drinking at a pub in London before walking the streets with a knife. In the early hours of the morning, he followed 18-year-old Sally Bowman as she returned home and stabbed her repeatedly outside her own front door. Her body was discovered just steps from safety. Dixie evaded arrest for 9 months until he was involved in an unrelated pub fight, and his DNA was entered into the national database, where it directly matched evidence from the murder scene. In 2006, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 34 years. Morbid facts. Neil Peart, legendary drummer of the band Rush, lived through a series of devastating personal tragedies. In 1997, his 19-year-old daughter Selena died in a single-car accident while driving to college. Less than a year later, his wife Jackie succumbed to cancer, though Peart later described it as dying of a broken heart. To cope with the losses, he took a 55,000-mile motorcycle journey across North and Central America to cope with his grief. Though he eventually returned to music and remarried, Peart later died in 2020 after a private battle with brain cancer. In 1991, 25-year-old Gregory Green stabbed his pregnant wife to death and spent 16 years behind bars for the crime. After his release, he married the daughter of a pastor who helped him earn parole and started a new family in Michigan. But in 2016, history repeated itself in a scene far more horrifying. Green tied up his wife, shot her 2 children from a previous marriage, then poisoned and suffocated their 2 young daughters, ages 4 and 5. When police arrived, they found his children dead and his wife bound and bleeding in the basement. Green calmly surrendered, telling officers, "I just killed my family." He later pled guilty to 4 counts of murder and was sentenced to 100 years in prison, ensuring he'll never get a second chance again. Morbid facts. In 2021, 75-year-old cyclist Dave Richards was hit by a drunk driver in Bristol, England, suffering catastrophic injuries that left him with burns across half his face, a shattered pelvis, and the loss of an eye. For years, he avoided mirrors and crowds, haunted by his own face and the looks of strangers. But in 2025, doctors at the Bristol 3D Medical Center gave him something never performed before, a 3D printed facial prosthesis that perfectly matched his skin tone, hair, and eye color. Using detailed scans of his head, they built a custom silicone replacement that restored the face he'd lost. In June of 2010, 7-year-old Kyron Horman proudly posed beside his science fair project on tree frogs at Skyline Elementary School in Portland, Oregon. It would mysteriously end up being the last photo ever taken of him. Moments later, Kyron was seen walking down the hallway toward his classroom and then upright vanished somewhere inside the school building. Despite an immediate search of every classroom, closet, and crawl space, no one ever saw him leave. When he didn't return home that afternoon, police launched one of the largest search efforts in Oregon history, combing the surrounding woods and rivers for months. His stepmother, Terry Horman, was the last person to see him alive but was never charged. 15 years later, the boy who disappeared inside his own school has never been found.
What do you mean? Let's talk. Talk about it. Over the phone. I don't know what's going to happen, but I just feel in my soul, only God knows, it should He could do this.
That was Michael Jackson on a recorded phone call from 2009, speaking to his former manager Dieter Wiesner just months before his sudden death. Jackson sounds panicked and overwhelmed, telling Wiesner there's a group of people who want to get rid of him. He warns that what he's dealing with is bigger than the government, but never names anyone or explains what he believes they want from him. Many believe the disturbing call is AI generated, but it's not. The call has circulated online for years, long before modern voice cloning tools existed. The audio has resurfaced heavily online in recent days, especially after the newly released Epstein files. Among the materials circulating are photographs showing Michael Jackson and Jeffrey Epstein together, which has led many to re-examine old footage, interviews, and audio recordings from Michael's final years. While the phone call itself doesn't mention Epstein or make any specific accusations, its timing and tone have caused renewed speculation about what Jackson believed was about to happen to him. Michael died just a few months after making that phone call on June 25, 2009. Authorities ruled his death the result of acute propofol intoxication caused by medical negligence, as his doctor would essentially give him anesthesia to put him to sleep every night. Dr. Conrad Murray was eventually convicted of involuntary manslaughter, and the case was closed as no evidence ever confirmed the threat Jackson believed he was facing. Morbid facts. Satoru Kobayashi, the competitive eater who helped popularize modern eating contests, said he stepped away from competition after years of extreme training left him disconnected from normal hunger. In recent interviews, he's explained that he rarely feels hunger and sometimes even forgets to eat, saying he envies people whose bodies still send basic appetite signals. Kobayashi suggested that constantly forcing himself beyond fullness may have dulled the body's natural warning system, with doctors noting that long-term competitive eating can distort hunger cues and place lasting stress on the body's digestive system. In December of 1984, 12-year-old Janelle Matthews disappeared from her home in Greeley, Colorado, after returning from a school concert, leaving behind signs that she'd been taken from the house. For decades, the case went unsolved until construction workers discovered her remains in 2019, 15 miles away from where she disappeared. Investigators soon focused on former neighbor Stephen Pankey, who'd repeatedly inserted himself into public discussions about the case and referenced it several times while running for governor of Idaho. Prosecutors said his own statements and changing stories helped tie him to the crime. In 2022, Pankey was convicted of kidnapping and murder and later sentenced to life in prison.